A year after our divorce, my ex texted, "We need to talk." The next morning, cops knocked. The timing wasn't accidental. Exactly 1 year. Not a coincidence. A decision. The message arrived late, just before midnight, as if she wanted it to be the last thing I saw before sleep. 4 words. No punctuation. No context. The kind of sentence that assumes history will do the work of explanation. We need to talk. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, not because I was unsure what it meant, but because I recognized the tactic. She had always believed that urgency could be manufactured simply by declaring it. I didn't reply. I set the phone face down and turned off the light. The room stayed quiet. No follow-up message. No clarification. She was waiting for the silence to make me uncomfortable. It didn't. Sleep came easily. Too easily for something that was supposed to matter. The knock woke me at 6:14 a.m. Not aggressive. Not hesitant. Precise. I opened my eyes and knew, before standing up, that it wasn't her. People knock differently when they want permission. This wasn't asking. I checked my phone. No new messages. No missed calls. Just that same line from the night before, unchanged. The knock came again. I got up, moved slowly, and opened the door. 2 police officers stood on my porch. Neutral posture. Hands visible. Voices calm. They asked my name. I confirmed it. One of them glanced at a tablet, then back at me, and explained why they were there. The explanation was short. Careful. Framed as routine. A report had been filed. A concern raised. They were required to follow up. I listened without interrupting. Behind them, the street looked exactly the same as it always did. A neighbor backed out of their driveway. Somewhere down the block, a garage door opened and closed. Ordinary morning sounds, happening inches away from something that had already crossed a line. They asked if I was alone. If anyone else had access to the house. If there had been recent contact. I answered honestly. Briefly. Yes. No. Yes. They took notes. Not suspiciously. Not sympathetically. Just methodically. When they finished, one of them nodded and said they would document the interaction. The other handed me a card with a name and a number I probably wouldn't need. Before leaving, he paused. For what it's worth, he said, you did the right thing by not engaging. I watched them walk back to their car and drive away. Only then did I pick up my phone. A new message had arrived while they were standing outside. I didn't mean for it to go that far. No apology. No explanation. Just a quiet acknowledgement that something had moved beyond her control. I didn't respond. I made coffee I didn't drink and stood at the kitchen window, watching the street return to its normal rhythm. The knock had already faded into the background noise of the morning, but the implication hadn't. She had wanted a conversation. What she got instead was a record. And records don't disappear just because someone regrets starting them. The report didn't arrive immediately. That was the first thing people misunderstand about situations like this. They expect consequences to be loud. Instant. Final. They imagine raised voices, flashing lights, dramatic turns. What actually happens is quieter. The report arrived 3 days later, as a notification I almost dismissed as spam. A reference number. A brief summary. Language stripped of emotion until only sequence remained. Subject contacted. No immediate threat observed. Interaction documented. Nothing more. But documentation has weight. Not emotional weight. Structural weight. Once something is written down, it stops belonging to the people involved and starts belonging to a system that doesn't forget the way humans do. I read it once. Then again, slower. There was no accusation in it. No judgment. But there was context. A timeline. A record of who initiated contact and how it escalated. That part mattered. Later that evening, she called. Not texted. Called. I let it ring. Then again. On the third attempt, I answered. Her voice sounded smaller than it had the last time we spoke in person. Not frightened. Adjusted. Like someone who had just realized the room they were standing in was larger than they thought. I didn't think they'd actually come, she said. I didn't respond. I just wanted someone to talk to you, she continued. You weren't answering. I didn't know what else to do. That sentence contained 3 assumptions and 1 lie. I waited. They said it was routine, she added quickly. They told me it wasn't a big deal. That part was true. And irrelevant. What did you tell them? She asked. The question came too fast. Too exposed. Enough, I said. Silence stretched between us. Not tense. Informational. You didn't have to take it that far, she finally said. There it was. The framing. As if events had moved because of me. As if systems activated themselves out of spite. You contacted them, I said. I contacted someone, she corrected. I didn't file anything. I just said I was worried. Worried is a flexible word. So is need. You told them we needed to talk, I said. She exhaled sharply. I was trying to open a door, she said. That door was closed, I said. Another pause. You didn't even ask why, she said. I looked at the report again, lying open on the table. I didn't need to, I said. That was when her tone changed. Not defensive. Not apologetic. Calculating. So what happens now? She asked. The question wasn't about us. It was about the record. Nothing, I said. Unless something else happens. She didn't like that answer. You're acting like I did something wrong, she said. I didn't argue. I just wanted to talk, she said again, quieter this time. After a year, I thought. She stopped. I could hear her thinking. Reframing. Searching for language that would restore balance without admitting loss. I thought we could be adults about it, she finished. I smiled once. Not because it was funny. But because it was familiar. Adults, in her vocabulary, were people who handled things privately. Quietly. Without involving anyone who would write things down. I am being an adult, I said. That's why I didn't respond. She didn't speak for several seconds. Then, you didn't have to involve the police. I didn't, I said. Another silence. She ended the call without saying goodbye. That night, I slept deeply. Not from exhaustion, from clarity. Something that had been unresolved had finally taken shape, not between us, but around us. The next morning, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. It contained no greeting. Just a sentence. Please confirm receipt of the attached documentation. Attached was a copy of the report. Sent to her. She hadn't asked for it. She'd been given it. That was when I understood what she had actually done that night. She hadn't wanted to talk. She'd wanted leverage. And leverage only works until it's logged. She didn't respond to the email. Not immediately. That silence wasn't strategic. It was diagnostic. People pause like that when they're trying to understand the shape of something new, something that doesn't behave the way they expect. Leverage is supposed to feel heavy in the hand. This had slipped through hers without resistance and landed somewhere she couldn't reach. 2 days passed. Then she sent a message. Not to me. To a version of me that no longer existed. I think this got misunderstood. I never wanted to involve anyone. Can we clear this up before it turns into something unnecessary? The word unnecessary did a lot of work there. It implied excess. Overreaction. That whatever had happened could still be folded back into privacy if everyone agreed to pretend it hadn't crossed a threshold. I didn't reply. I forwarded the message to the same address that had sent the report. No commentary. No framing. Just sequence. That night, she called again. This time, I answered on the first ring. She spoke quickly, as if momentum could still change direction if she moved fast enough. They said there's a record now, she said. Do you know what that means? Yes, I said. They told me it stays even if nothing else happens, she continued. Even if we don't talk again. I waited. You could tell them it was nothing, she said. You could say you're fine. That it was a misunderstanding. I looked at the calendar on the wall. The date was circled, not because it mattered emotionally, but because I'd been tracking time since the message arrived. 1 year, I said. What? She asked. You waited a year, I said. Then you texted at midnight. Then you contacted them. That doesn't mean. It means it's documented, I said. She went quiet. I didn't know it worked like this, she said finally. That sentence again. The assumption that ignorance should reverse outcome. It always worked like this, I said. You just never needed to know. She asked if there was anything she could do. Not to fix things between us. To soften the record. I told her the truth. Not now, I said. The call ended without anger. Without resolution. Just a clean disconnect, like a line cut rather than pulled loose. The next development didn't come from her. It came from a mutual acquaintance. Someone who used to phrase things carefully, and now did so with visible effort. She's having a hard time, the voice said. She feels like this went too far. I listened. She says she only wanted to talk, the voice continued. That she didn't think it would follow her. Follow was an interesting word. Records don't follow. They wait. I didn't escalate anything, I said. I know, the voice replied quickly. Too quickly. I'm just saying, maybe there's a way to de-escalate. There it was. The fantasy that systems can be talked down the way people can. It's already settled, I said. There was a pause on the other end. Settled how? The voice asked. By existing, I said. After that call, the messages stopped. Not because she'd accepted the outcome. But because she'd understood the boundary. A week later, I received another notification. A supplemental note had been added to the report. Not an accusation. Not an update on me. A clarification. It stated that no further contact had been initiated by the subject. That attempts at indirect communication had ceased. Compliance, without instruction. That was the moment the situation stopped being emotional and became historical. She didn't text again. She didn't call. And for the first time since the divorce, there was no open thread, no conversation paused mid-sentence, no unresolved implication waiting to be activated later. The silence this time wasn't a tactic. It was a consequence. The next attempt didn't come from her. It came through someone else. That was predictable. When direct access is gone, people look for softer paths. Voices that feel neutral. Faces that still carry familiarity. Someone who can frame the situation as concern instead of control. The call came in the afternoon. A name I recognized. Someone we had both trusted once. Someone who still believed context could soften consequences. I don't want to get in the middle, they said immediately. That's how you know they already are. I just thought you should know she's really shaken by all of this. I didn't respond. They told her it's on file now, the voice continued. That it could come up later if anything else happens. She didn't realize. She did, I said. A pause. She didn't realize it would stay, the voice corrected. That's not my responsibility, I said. Silence on the line. The kind where someone is deciding whether to keep pushing or retreat gracefully. She's asking if there's a way to clarify, the voice said finally. To make it clear nothing was wrong. It already is clear, I said. But the record. The record reflects what happened, I said. Not what she intended. Another pause. I'm just trying to help, the voice said. I know, I said. That's why you shouldn't. The call ended shortly after that. Not angrily. Carefully. That night, I received an email from an address I'd never seen before. A legal assistant. Different department. Same system. It wasn't about me. It was confirmation that no further action was required unless new information emerged. In other words, the situation was stable. That's the word they use when something has stopped moving. I didn't forward the email to her. I didn't need to. She knew. People always know when the door has closed for real. There's a shift, subtle, but unmistakable. Conversations dry up. Allies stop calling. Even the tone of silence changes. It's no longer charged. It's administrative. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. No messages. No calls. No attempts to reopen the past under a new name. The story, such as it was, had reached its natural conclusion. One evening, I was asked casually if I'd heard from her recently. I said no. The question wasn't followed up. That was new too. Months later, I found the original message while clearing out old notifications. We need to talk. It looked smaller than I remembered. Less like a demand. More like an artifact, something that once had momentum and now had none. I deleted it. Not ceremonially. Not with intention. Just because it no longer belonged anywhere. What stayed wasn't tension or resentment. It was understanding. Some words can't be taken back once they activate something larger than the people who said them. Some actions don't escalate, they reassign authority. She had wanted a conversation. What she created instead was a boundary that didn't require my participation to hold. And once that happens, there's nothing left to argue about. The ending didn't announce itself. It arrived the way most real endings do, quietly, without ceremony, after everyone had already stopped paying attention. There was no final conversation. No apology. No moment of closure you could point to and say, that was it. Life simply adjusted. Her name stopped appearing anywhere it didn't belong. Mutual acquaintances learned, instinctively, not to bring her up. Conversations that once felt like they carried subtext returned to being just conversations. The system had finished its work. What surprised me wasn't the relief. It was the absence of anything that needed replacing. I hadn't lost something. I'd shed something that had been lingering past its relevance. One afternoon, months later, I received a routine notice, the kind you skim without really reading. At the bottom, almost as an afterthought, was a reference number I recognized. The report. Still there. Unchanged. Inactive. Not a threat. Not a warning. Just a record. That's when it finally settled in, nothing about this had been dramatic. Not really. The story only felt intense because it crossed from private into documented. From emotional into procedural. Once that happened, everything else followed naturally. I thought back to the moment she sent the message. We need to talk. What she had meant was, I want access again. What the system heard was, there is concern. Those are very different statements. People often believe that intent matters more than outcome. They're taught that if you mean well, things can be smoothed over. Walked back. Reframed. That only works in conversations. It doesn't work in records. I never heard from her again. Not because she had nothing to say. But because she finally understood that saying it wouldn't change anything. And that understanding didn't come from me. It came from the knock. From the report. From the realization that some lines, once crossed, don't snap back into place just because someone wishes they would. There was no victory in it. Just alignment. The past stayed where it belonged. The present moved forward without resistance. And the silence that remained wasn't heavy or charged. It was neutral. The kind of quiet that tells you something has ended properly, not with emotion, not with force, but with structure. She wanted a conversation. What she created instead was distance that no message could close. And once distance becomes official, it doesn't need to be maintained. It holds itself. Time passed without markers. No anniversaries. No reminders. No moments that demanded reflection. That was how I knew it was over. When something is unresolved, it keeps announcing itself. It resurfaces in small ways, thoughts that circle back, conversations that drift, questions that don't quite close. None of that happened here. What remained wasn't memory. It was residue. Not emotional, procedural. Every so often, I'd notice it indirectly. A form that asked whether there had been prior contact involving authorities. A checkbox that existed because systems assume continuity, not forgiveness. I checked it once. Then moved on. I never told anyone the full story. Not because I was protecting her, but because stories invite interpretation, and interpretation invites debate. There was nothing to debate. The facts were already filed. Once, much later, someone asked me if I ever wondered what she had wanted to say that night. I thought about it honestly. Then said no. Curiosity only survives when there's unfinished business. This wasn't unfinished. It was simply concluded without conversation. She had believed that time softened boundaries. That distance weakened them. She was wrong. Time doesn't soften boundaries. It clarifies which ones still exist. The year between the divorce and the message hadn't been a gap. It had been confirmation. Silence doing its work uninterrupted. When she broke it, she didn't reopen a connection. She activated a process. That distinction mattered more than intent ever could. I stopped thinking about the knock as an event. It became a reference point, not emotionally, but structurally. The moment when control transferred fully out of our hands and into something that didn't negotiate. That's the part people miss. Authority doesn't arrive to punish. It arrives to stabilize. And once stabilization happens, there's nothing left to push against. I never blocked her number. There was no need. Blocked numbers imply temptation. This didn't. The silence wasn't enforced. It was accepted. Sometimes, late at night, I'd remember the exact phrasing again, not the message, but the title it became in my mind. A year after our divorce. Not because the year mattered. But because she had waited long enough to believe the past would protect her. It didn't. Nothing dramatic followed. Nothing needed to. Some endings are loud so everyone knows they happened. Others are quiet so they can't be undone. This one belonged to the second kind. And when I realized that, fully, without resistance, I understood something simple and permanent. She wanted to talk. The system answered instead. And systems don't hang up.